Our first guest has insight into the world of supplying HVAC products. He's an advocate for geothermal and is an active member in geothermal organizations. He and his company have had rapid growth and success over the last 4 years. He's considered to be a top salesman of geothermal products in the country, and I am proud to call him my friend. Please welcome Eric Feasby. I wanted to start off with a little bit about you, your personal background. So, who are you? Where are you from? What do you do?
Well, my name is Eric. I'm with a company called K&E Distributing. Been there with them, it'll be 4 years this summer, so about 3.5 years. Been in wholesale distribution for about 23 years and grew up all over the world. My dad was in the military, so I really don't have a home, but been living in Missouri down near Springfield for a better part of 11 years. So
Cool. So, what brought you into the HVAC industry or the construction trades? You've got some background out of the HVAC industry and some within the HVAC industry. So, tell me a little bit about that.
yeah, just been mechanically inclined always. Started out of high school in some computer-based stuff, which obviously that was a long time ago when it was actually fairly new trade, but I just didn't find it didn't stimulate my brain. So got into kitchens and baths and did some of that, some other trades, and then had an opportunity from a good friend of mine to get into a place that no longer exists called Midway Supply and in Chicagoland market, and been in wholesale distribution for HVAC ever since.
Very cool. So, tell me a little bit about what K&E does as far as what products they provide.
They focus on high efficiency and geothermal specifically as their primary lines. So they're what I kind of would call a boutique distributor in the sense that they don't carry a unitary line. There's no Train, American Standard, Carrier, none of that product there. But what they have is Geo, everything for Geo. We do a high efficiency LG ductless and a product called eCore, which is an inverter-driven split. But realistically, we also do a bunch of hydronic heating, whether that's water to water or boiler. So we kind of just specialize on what we do. So we're kind of boutique in the sense that we know what we know and we try to do it very well. So
Sure, kind of hitting that niche, some of those niche markets, the Geo, the ductless with the VRF, and some of the um, hydronic stuff. There's even some geothermal water to water systems that you guys have that are kind of unique to our market. Um, uh, what are some of the things that a distributor is looking for when they're going to bring a product on?
So when it comes to just distributors in general and products in general, you're looking for reliable products that are very well supported by the manufacturer. And there's an easy relationship between the distributor and the manufacturer. Geo goes a little bit further because there might be more support than normal needed. So the communication channel needs to be better. And K&E's owner is into technology. So anything that is new and cutting edge, he's always investigating. He's always looking into. So, like you were mentioning with the water to water that we're importing now from Spain, it is the only product of its kind in our market. They are just now getting to the U.S., but they are cutting edge. They do something niche, but they do it extremely well, and it's very efficient. So I think that's what but you also want to be reliable and be able to communicate. So, that is very important for a distributor because it's important for the contractor, which in turn is important for the homeowners.
Very cool. So, we got into some detail about what products K&E is supplying. For somebody who doesn't really know a lot about geothermal, how would you explain to somebody what a geothermal unit is that has never heard of Geo?
So obviously the least technical answer that I can give someone is taking the temperature in the ground that is very consistent and using that as my source for heating or cooling their house. So it's taking the thermal energy of the earth and transferring it into the house.
People are often concerned when they hear like geothermal heat pump, because geothermal units are heat pumps, and they may have had some bad experiences with what we know as air source heat pumps, geothermal being water source heat pumps. What would you explain the difference between air source and geo for like a homeowner who's, had some negative interaction with an air source heat pump?
So typically a system that's been designed on air source is going to have limitations based on air temperature. So outdoor air temperature affects the capacity of the indoor unit. And I think that most of the complaints that people have had would be contractors who have not addressed that appropriately for the backup or supplemental heat situation. So the difference between that is the air temperature is going to drop. And in some occasions, we'll get outside of our norms in all of our cities, and our equipment will no longer give us anything, and so they'll have to shut off. The difference between that, the air and the water, is my water temp is 55 degrees no matter what the outside air temperature is, which means I'm not directly affected by the outdoor air temperature on my actual capacity of my unit. Now, my house might have more need for heat based on outdoor temperature, but my ability to provide it is not affected. So you should not have that problem with a geothermal.
So for our end user, we'll call them end user customers, homeowners, building owners who have had air source in the past, what happens whenever an air source basically gets to a point where it's not producing heat to heat the space anymore? Say we've got temps below its operating capacity outside. What happens then? They just lose heat?
If the system is designed correctly, again, that's a big if. If you're all electric, you would stage in electric backup heat, which then would cause there to be a supplemental source to help the unit when it's not working, or when the unit goes outside of capacity, it'll go all the way on with that. So you'll be running a all electric resistance heat at a lot more expense, but it will, if it's sized correctly, should satisfy the load. The other side could be a dual fuel situation where they have a gas furnace backup, which would do the same thing. When it gets to a temperature where it can no longer produce enough heat, it'll switch over to its backup.
Gotcha. So a lot of those people who have had bad experience with air sources because they've probably got all electric, right? And their air source, we start getting to those lower temps, or you get a lot of defrost time for, that's a little bit of technical, but you get a lot of defrost time. Turns on the resistive heat, and that resistive heat is just very inefficient. That's where they get the high electric bills, even though they've got an air source heat pump, which is supposed to be efficient. I've heard of people having $1,000, $1,500 electric bills in a 2,000 square foot house during those times. So that's where that's coming from, is the resistive heat, you're saying?
Yeah, it would be. There's a couple things. I mean, one of them is a machine that is not going to, say I designed my system to not shut off my outdoor. I'm going to work overtime and not really give you much heat. And I will also be running resistance. That the combination of that can really get expensive. There has to be a point where this no longer productive outside. I need to switch to inside, but it's still going to be expensive. There's no way around it. I always, look at it as, in my own world, is if you go to electric heat, it's like a meat slicer turning on your meter. It is ready to cut some meat. So,
Okay. So in Geo's, sound like you're saying Geo bringing in 55-degree water ideally from the ground. It's kind of in that ideal temperature for the heat pump to operate. And assuming that it's sized properly, you should never really bring the backup heat on, is what I'm hearing.
again, this goes back to contractor doing the right things, sizing a house, doing loads, which, most of the people that are doing geothermal are a little more thorough. So you do have that. But yes, you should be into a certain temperature range by design, not going into electric heat. So you should be saving a ton of money Not to mention, they're actually more efficient than even your highest efficiency air to air systems. There could be extremes in our zones that could cause a little backup electric to come on, but you're still way ahead savings wise.
As far as having geothermal installed over an air source heat pump or having an air source heat pump replaced by geo, is that something that you can do? Say you've already got an existing house and you want to go for geo. Can you have geothermal installed? Is it more for new construction? How does that whole thing work out?
Ideally, most people in the industry that are doing geo prefer to put it in new construction. It does make, there's some simplified things there. There's no reason it can't be put in a change out situation where you're getting rid of an air to air. There is limitations, which would be, do I have the space to be able to drill wells in the ground? And that, or horizontal, or however you're going to get your source. Do you have an ability to get to the ground for your system? You live in a very tight subdivision, that will limit the ability to be able to do that. But the technology is going all over the place right now with the boom we're going to see in geothermal in the next 10 years. I was reading an article the other day about this new drill that will actually it doesn't need a big rig and everything. It just eats itself down to the ground to where it needs to go. It's like a nanobot like thing. It's kind of intriguing. So when that technology becomes more popular, I might be able to put it in a subdivision lot. It's all about getting a rig in there is your limitation for that.
So that drill you saw in the article, the bit goes down to the bottom of the hole and stays at the bottom of the hole
No,
forever?
it actually is instead of being on a big rig with a derrick and a drill, it is a soft. It looked like it was probably about 8 foot long. It actually will eat and discharge its own stuff, almost like it's just a worm digging a hole in the ground. And then when you pull it out, you'll feed your loop back in and grout the hole. I don't
Interesting.
know a ton about it. I read the article. It was some scientists in Europe that are in the middle of doing this, and it's intriguing. But I think that we're going to see more technological changes to help with the install. A few years ago, we thought we had a new one with some heat exchangers down in a well. I mean, so there's all sorts of things which haven't come about yet. There's all sorts of things that technology is going to end up making it more user friendly to everybody and not specific customers.
Well, and a big thing is reducing the cost of install.
Yeah.
Because from what my understanding and what I hear most is the big barrier to entry for geo for homeowners especially and even building owners is the cost of the installation. And talk about that or what you know about that. I know you're a distributor, not an installer, but sounds like there's a big portion of that is the drilling.
Well, yeah. So the way I would look at it is, and it is an expense. So let's just put that on the table. But that is where the 30% tax credit should come into play. Typically, in an install, you're close to that 30% mark on the drilling. Now, if we could get that down, you could dip further into the cost of the overall job. But let's just say it's close to 30% to actually get the system loops in the ground. You take that out of the bracket, and then how far off are you from conventional, and how close is the payoff on something geo over air to air because of the efficiencies it's getting and the longevity you're going to get out of the systems, because there's nothing sitting outside in a 100-degree day. There's nothing sitting out in a 10-degree day or a minus 10-degree day. So it does give the ability to have longer life on your equipment too.
Cool. So let's talk more about the cost in comparison to conventional versus geo, the payoff. How do you figure out what the payoff is supposed to be? We talked about load calculations before. How would a homeowner or an installer look at a property and say geo's the right fit, geo's not the right fit? Because I'm assuming I know that there's places where geo's not the right fit. So what would be your experience in locating the right fit?
Well, so I mean, the right fit, wrong fit conversation, there's properties that it's not the right fit, but it really is location of property and some of those factors. If I'm in need of a system, the way things are going right now, we are going to be electrifying in some fashion, whatever that looks like. And so if you're going to get to a place in the next 5 years where you're going to be changing a system out, one of the things you should consider is going with Geo because of the cost difference. And it's the actual payoff, like you were saying. You do have a 30% tax credit that's going to come into effect that'll offset hopefully the drilling. So let's assume that that's covered by the 30%. In a perfect world, it could go a little further, but every market's going to be a little different on that. And there's other ways to do it in other markets where it's even cheaper. And then you're going to go and say, I'm going to need a system, whether it's conventional or geo. And you're going to say, one's going to cost me X and one's going to cost me this much more, which would be the geo. And you have to say, now it comes down to what is my monthly usage? What is my cost going to be to run them? Geo is a lot more efficient, and there's a big range on payoff on those as far as there's obviously full inverter doing 100% of your hot water also. And then there's just a Geo, a two-stage Geo. So there's a big range on payoff on those pieces of equipment, as there also is a big difference in the cost of those two pieces of equipment. I would say typically the answer that is given is 6 to 8 years on payoff on what you save monthly on your bill. And that doesn't include, you should get money back from the federal government as a tax credit, which anybody can. I know one of the things that I hear a lot is that, my customer doesn't qualify for a tax credit because of their income. Well, that tax credit can be spread out up to 10 years. So even if it takes you 10 years to get your portion of that back, you have any tax bracket, any retired person can get themselves into a 10-year payback. And there's local rebates in most areas. There are some areas where they don't have rebates on geothermal, but once you take those out of it, with your savings a month, you should pay off the system in 6 to 8 years. And the other side of that is we're building systems in the sense that should last 20 years. So you should have, at worst case, 10 years system saving you money that is, and not giving you problems. So realistically, the payoff in a perfect world should be right around 6 years. And that's where I think maybe you're alluding to the fact that there is certain scenarios where if the math says it's going to be 10-year payoff, is that really the right choice? But again, having a $600 bill in January is a tough one to swallow too. So it's hard to make that call.
For sure. Yeah, it's kind of an individual thing, right? Like I always tell people, I'm just going to provide you the information and give you the best answers I can for you to make an informed decision when it comes to homeowners and building owners. Geo's not right for everybody. There's an argument that if you're only going to be there for 3 or 4 years, it's not worth it. There's some conversation about the increased value of your home when it comes to having Geo in it, being able to show potential buyer the reduction in utilities. There's a lot of conversation as far as longevity of the equipment, and a lot of people talk about the efficiency in Geo as being like the main driver, but there's other benefits to Geo other than just efficiency. Can you talk a little bit about that and tell us what those might be?
I would guess the other benefits are a lot of the Geo equipment is backed differently by manufacturers. So most of the manufacturers have a better warranty on a Geo piece of equipment as opposed to conventional. Now, to say I can give you 10-year labor on a piece of equipment, you can get that on a lot of conventional, but it's a separate purchase policy where a lot of the Geo manufacturers try to, on their tiered product, try to give that as a standard because it's a different customer and with a different expectation. The one thing that I can say that like I said, I've been around wholesale better than 23 years now. I've been in lots of houses with a lot of variable speed air to air, ductless houses, all sorts of different houses. But I will say that specifically an inverter driven Geo in my opinion, creates one of the most comfortable houses I've ever been in. And when I walk in that house, you wouldn't have to tell me they have an inverter driven geo, because it is the perfect humidity level. There's hardly any airflow noise, but it's like right at set point. It's very comfortable. And I think that makes a huge difference in lots of things in the house. I mean, you're obviously not having mold issues. You're not having lots of other issues because you have a piece of equipment that is just keeping humidity at the right spot. So
Sure. And you fell right into my trap. I was hitting you on comfort and how quiet the units are. Even,
wow.
even, no, you're all good. There's different levels of efficiency within Geo too. So even one of the leaser efficient Geos, which are significantly more efficient than air source heat pumps, but on the lower end of Geo, those are even more quiet and have, especially for outside noise, it seems like the condenser is always near the master bedroom on a conventional system, or an air source heat pump. It's always next to the master bedroom or next to the outdoor patio. So you're either dealing with the noise while you're outside enjoying it in the summertime, enjoying your patio, or you're listening to it clank on and off at night while you're laying in bed next to your master. Now, that's not everybody's case, but it seems like that's a lot of it. Whereas Geo, you don't have an outdoor unit at all. Obviously, we spoke about that. And the fan speed control, I would say it's a different quality level of manufacturing than you get out of normal air source equipment. So yeah, you fell right into the trap on that one.
They definitely are quiet, and you definitely know how many times you've been in a backyard where you're beside a deck or beside a bedroom window, whether it's master or not.
So as far as technology goes, we spoke a little bit about that on Geo. What advances have you seen that are actually implemented in, you've done some conventional HVAC, working for a distributor that did conventional stuff, and now you're working for one that primarily does high efficiency equipment. We'll just say that as a broad thing, high efficiency equipment. And what are some of the advancements in Geo that you've seen over your years in the industry?
Well, and I can tell you that I've worked for 4 distributors, I think, 3, 4. Well, this is my 4th one. So, and most distributors say they have something that is Geo. Typically, that's a Bosch product, but it could be some other brands. But those distributors really, they can get a model number and they can cross it to a model and they can supply a replacement. But when it comes down to understanding how to make that machine work right, they're not really the source for it. So technology is hard for contractors to keep on top of and distributors to keep on top of. So you take a distributor who has, a unitary line and a geo line and a ductless line, and you start to add things on. They have 6 major products, and they really need to keep 6 major products, because if one of those goes bad, they could lose too much of their business. So it's this world. Well, they can't be masters of everything. Even the big ones that try to do it really fail on some areas. So the technology is hard to keep on top of. And so that's where distributors, and there are quite a few of them in the US that are really just geo-specific. They focus on the market they know. They focus on the advancing technologies. So there's been a lot of all around technological changes. But one of the things that I've seen in Geo, and again, our boss is big on chasing down technology he thinks is really good, is the inverter-driven water-to-water that he's importing from Spain. And one of the things that, hydronic heating is known for a long time, and some commercial people understand hydronic cooling. Residentially, that is not a typical known product. So along with this inverter-driven water-to-water, my boss has gotten into a bunch of small zone heating and cooling water units that are in wall, in ceiling, in floor. So I can actually do a zone system, whether I'm heating or cooling, almost like a ductless, but I'm using water. And some of the benefits to water are I can run a 40-degree evap, and it doesn't matter what my airflow is, because I'm providing 40-degree water. If I speed my airflow up, it doesn't change it. If I slow it down, it doesn't change it. So I have the ability to run a variable speed motor on my coil and really pull the moisture out of that air. So I can really dehumidify extremely well with those products, which anybody knows anything about cooling, dehumidification is the primary role of air conditioning. If you're not dehumidifying, you're not comfortable. So, and the same thing with heating, with those zones, a lot of these houses, they're using the water to water to do heated floors, and warm floors is really good. And most people know the hydronic side on the heat side. It's just that cooling side that I think is really a European thing, but I think it is something that is changing. What I'd like to see is a geo that is being able to do ductless too. So it'd be a geothermal condenser, so water to refrigerant, and then be able to hook up multiple heads off of one condenser and kind of take the best of both worlds, being able to zone better, smaller zone systems, and be able to provide that off of a geo. So there's some of it out there. It's mostly in Europe. It's really not in the US right now.
So is that something that a European product you were talking about, is that something you could do with that? Could you do like water to water, set an air handler, set, some of these smaller, ductless or in ceiling or floor ductless water, coils, evaporators, stuff like that, and build a system that way? It's not as cut and dry. It's a little more, technical, complicated, but it could be done with that system, right?
It's more technically complicated to a certain degree, but it's also, if you understand water flow, it's actually as easy as refrigerant flow. So the reality is we have multiple manufacturers that we deal with that create, poured in concrete floor trough blowers. We have ones that go up in ceiling joists. We have ones that could be put into wall cavities with the supplying just that area up above, like in a kitchen or a living room. We also have manufacturers that do wall units like a ductless, like a high wall ductless unit, all with water. So there's plenty of product for the water side for cooling and heating. Just in our country, it has not really been the standard form of conditioning. We've been an air blown forced air system has been our primary. In some areas, we've been hydronic warm, but not hydronic cool. So the warm part of it we've done in certain areas, but you go to Chicago, East Coast, New York, and some of these places where you have a lot of old boiler systems, or they're using radiant floor or radiators, they had to have a secondary cooling source. Most of those didn't have any kind of air conditioning for the better part of time. And then they'll put in a second whole system just for the cold air. Whereas going with these systems, I can produce, plenty of hot water for all those systems, and then flip it. I can produce plenty of cold water so I could get one machine to provide both sources.
So it sounds like you guys have simple geo that would take the place of like an air source or just regular air conditioner and furnace or air source heat pump. Simple, super simple, drill the loop, tie into the unit, use the existing ductwork, all the way up to super fine-tuned systems that will do, sounds like it would probably do heating for your pool, your domestic water. It would do individual zones for rooms. If you had a commercial building, you could probably do like a server room, cooling for a server room separately from all these individual zones. Sounds like a super customizable control system would probably come from you guys as well. That would be customizable to the specific project. And that's great. So there at K&E, if I was a contractor and I wanted to have a project that was super complicated like that, or even a simple project, you guys help out with that? Do you just provide the products?
Yeah, we do for basically any product we supply. We'll do freeloads. So we will take that off of the back of a contractor, get us a print and get us some information like windows and walls, insulation and stuff. We'll do a load for you. If we need to go further than that and you say, hey, this system, we want it to be radiant floor, we can do pipe layout and do a radiant floor system. If we want to do a geothermal radiant floor, water to water, we can do that. If we want to do a cooling fan coil, I mean, like you said, complexity goes from very simple to really extreme. There's a house that's being built in Colombia that has potentially going to have 8 of these big water to waters, and it's all going to be zoned, and it's going to be complex. And we have the ability in that system, we'd work with the actual manufacturer of the product to make sure that everybody is aware that it's doing what it needs to do. But again, that's one of the things we look for as a distributor is the availability to work with our provider, the manufacturer. So if that product was one that wasn't friendly for us to work with, that would have probably been something we wouldn't have brought in. The fact that they are easy to get a hold of and deal with makes it a product that we want to bring in.
So focusing a little more on like a contractor or installer or somebody who wants to service, maybe a technician that wants to service Geo or a company that wants to bring Geo on as a line, what is something that you would look for as a distributor, as a potential installer or a dealer, somebody who's going to get licensed? Walk me through that. You've got no Geo experience and you want to start putting these things in and servicing them. What would you look for there?
So you made a comment, and then I then followed up and made the exact same comment, from the easy Geo to the complex Geo. And I will tell you, people that have worked on Geo for quite a while, it is fairly easy, but it is something that you need to have full understanding of what you're doing. So the number one thing I would look for in a contractor is somebody who understands that it's a good revenue stream. It's actually potentially a better revenue stream for a contractor to do more Geo, but at the same time, they have to be committed to being a learning and go to training. And one of the things that I always find amazing is when people don't want to do it. It's usually because they don't understand it. It's confusing, and 80% of that system is exactly the same as every other system they work on. The only difference is instead of having an outdoor unit, I have water. All you have to do is understand how to read the water. You'll understand the system. So I agree that you said it's easy and you do a lot of it. So you know it's easy, but someone that's never put a pressure gauge in a port for water doesn't know what they're looking for. They don't know what differential they're shooting for, what temperature differential either. But once they can learn that, it is easy. I agree with you. It is easy. But so the one thing I would look for as a contractor would be someone who says, yeah, we like to get training, whether that's, a manufacturer or us, in this case, K&E, willing to come to their place and train. I mean, training can happen in multiple different ways, but the reality is, I think that in our world of contractors, that isn't always the case. I don't think contractors are always willing to get trained, and they'll stay away from that kind of stuff because it's not known. It's an unknown to them. They know what they know, and they don't want something new. So obviously, that wouldn't be an ideal candidate for a contractor.
So do you see a lot of these guys get hung up? Maybe they worked on a Geo and it kind of bit them in the butt maybe a little bit and they didn't really understand it. So they get resistive to bringing that on? Or is it more of just like from the beginning, they're like, we're not doing anything with Geo. Like it's really just, they don't have a desire to learn it, but then you may have somebody who does have a desire. And one of my things that you said, we do some Geo, and yeah, we're an installer of Geo. So one of the things that I tell other contractors who are not experienced with Geo is just like a heat pump. Like it's just like an air source heat pump. It has all the same components. There's nothing magical about it. It's still got a reversing valve, still got a compressor, still got controls, but doesn't go into defrost. It's about the biggest difference. And I find honestly Geo easier than air source in heating mode, especially because you go to the water side and you can see exactly what your system is operating as far as capacity in the water side. The water side doesn't lie. You're either operating a 5-ton unit at 10,000 BTUs or it's operating at capacity, 60,000 BTUs. Yeah. And the water side will not lie to you.
I agree with that. So my experience, obviously dealing with Missouri and Kansas, and having really only been focused in Geo to this level for the last 3 years. I mean, it was definitely something I dabbled in, but since I worked with K&E, all of a sudden it's like there's a whole world here that I didn't know existed. So I would fall into the same trap. But most contractors have had a bad experience. And I can give you an example of a bad experience. I come into the house, I hook my gauges up, which is a no-no, but it's a critically charged system. I hook my gauges up. I got a bad TXV. It's not doing what it should do. And then they call and order a TXV, and they come and change the TXV, evacuate the system, clean it, fill it, charge, weighted charge in, and it's doing the exact same thing. It's because they never touched the water. The water was really the problem, and they blamed it on the TXV, or they blamed it on a internal motor on the water side. There's all sorts of things that get blamed, but it's because they don't understand that the water doesn't lie. I think that the training, in all honesty, that is important, that most people get when they deal with geo is really just the water side. And there's training that goes way too far, and I've been in them, and I think it's good training. But realistically, am I doing the math every time I touch a system on heater rejection and heater extraction? No, but I do know how to check my pressure in, pressure out, water in, water out, and I know how to look at the back of the chart, and I can tell you exactly how many BTUs I'm giving. So realistically, that is the heat of rejection or extraction. I just don't have to know the formula. I just use their thing, and then I can do the math and make it work. So it is not as hard as people make it out to be, but they're scared of it, or they've had a very bad experience and replaced parts and couldn't fix it, and then someone else had to come in, and they're like, I'm never doing that again.
Right. There does need to be an understanding of the refrigerant cycle, like actually understanding the refrigerant cycle. And you said earlier, as far as the techs and stuff go out there, if anybody's listening that walks up on a geo unit, I feel like a lot of customers call an HVAC company and they send somebody out. The company doesn't know it's geo. They send somebody out who's never seen geo before, and they're in a desperate position. It's 100 degrees outside. They have no air conditioning, and the customer's like, "What's going on with my unit?" And the tech has a desire to fix it, right? They've called us there to fix it. What are we going to do? Well, in the conventional world, one of the first things a lot of people do is hook up their gauges. If they're getting a no cooling, obviously the fan's working and you've checked the thermostat, it's time to hook the gauges up and see what the refrigerant's doing. And a lot of technicians, especially entry-level technicians, don't have a great understanding of the refrigerant cycle. So it's hard for them to, if you're somebody who hooks up to a conventional system and starts second guessing, what your refrigerant is doing, training, especially before you start diving into a geo unit, is important. And the last thing you do for a geo is hook up to the refrigerant circuit. Like, you should figure out everything else first. And if you're not familiar with geo, call the technical support line before you hook up your gauges. Because I would find that 9 times out of 10, it's not a refrigerant related issue. It's usually something else.
Yeah.
On service.
And if you have 2 people, well, I'll even be kind. Let's say you have 3 technicians in there and they hook up, you are now not producing what you should, because you have taken enough charge out of that system trapped in your hoses that it is now it is a refrigerant circuit issue. It's probably both, but it is now become both. It wasn't both when you started. So yeah, I would 100%. I have a few techs that'll call me and say, well, my pressures are, and my response is always like, what's your water? Why are you hooked up? That is you just have to try to train that into people. I think a good tech that wants to learn can get that pretty easily. Check the water first. That's the biggest thing you got to remember as a tech.
So as far as K&E goes, you're the territory manager over Missouri and Kansas, or a big portion of Missouri and a big portion of Kansas. I think you split
Missouri,
part of it.
Southern Kansas, yeah.
Yeah, but K&E's in 7 states. Is that right?
I believe we're in 8 now.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
Basically the middle of the country.
Yes.
Not Texas.
No.
But basically the middle of the country.
Kansas, and then go straight north to the Dakotas, Nebraska,
Okay.
Iowa, and Minnesota, Wisconsin.
Okay. And you guys have technical support guys in the office, right? Like somebody could call and they'll help you out. And I've had experience with your guys' technical support, and they would help even if it wasn't a unit that was bought through you guys, and if it was even maybe a unit that's not even sold by you guys. If somebody was really needing help and they said, hey, I've got trouble, can you help me? I would expect that K&E's technical support would be there and help them out the best they can. You don't
Absolutely.
know necessarily that manufacturer. You may not know the intricacies of that equipment, but stuff like water side is universal to Geo. So it's you know they would help you out. I feel like so.
And
And
we have. So yeah, I
sure,
mean,
sure,
there's definitely there's a point where we have to say you need to call. If there's a problem that starts once you diagnose a certain level and you're starting to get into, it could be compressor or it could be major components on a product we don't sell, we'll then say call. But I have customers that are calling me on other brands all the time.
yeah.
Let me bounce this off you. Something don't seem right. And I'm more than happy to help. And I know Jeremy Smith does it all the time. So
Sure. Yeah, and you're kind of unique as far as a TM goes because you've got quite a bit of technical experience and capability. Whereas I find a lot of TMs, not just in the geo world, but just in general, they're kind of I call them paper pushers, salesmen. They're good at getting you the equipment and helping maybe find the right product for your service, but not necessarily going to be somebody you call with a technical issue. They're going to say, what is suction pressure? Not what is your suction pressure, but what is that? I've never heard of that before.
yeah,
I would say that that's unique for you, but he's been, sounds like they've got a good support team and training too. So you can do training through K&E specifically. You have a training center, if you will.
a lab,
Yeah, lab. Yep.
training lab. Yep. And that's for all of our product line, not just Climate Master, not just Geostar, not just EcoForce. We have LG. I mean, we have everything realistically, everything we try to sell, we have set up in a training situation in that lab.
So is contractors going back to that who would be looking for training in geo, they can go on your website, get training there. They can reach out to you guys via phone for training. You guys do training several times a year for geo, right? Or
Yeah, on our website, there's a training tab in the extras that anybody could go and check anytime for trainings. Obviously, reach out to the office or to any territory manager in your area. Obviously, the states we get to, if you're listening to this outside that state, I would say most distributors who really specialize in geothermal are going to offer it some fashion. One of the bigger differences, some brands require you to go to the factory to get trained as the only source. And that, depending on where you are, could be quite a expense to get to the factory. So there's a lot of brands out there that'll do in-house training from the local distributor. As a contractor, I would probably lean to something like that because then you also have localized support to a certain degree, technical ability in a driving radius, if you will. So the distributor will send somebody if they need to because it's not 2 flights and a 3 hotel stay. It's a 1 day drive, So I think that's important.
so, but mobile cert training too. You guys have a mobile
Yes.
training unit. And so we've talked about company or technician that's interested in doing geo. We've talked about support from you guys in the manufacturer with training and technical support. What about the sales aspect of it? You talked earlier about it could be a good revenue stream or more lucrative than doing conventional stuff. What are some of the key points for I'm going to go and sell a geo unit? What should they be hitting on as far as how do you price that install? How do you show cost comparison and what a payoff would be? There's a lot of calculations there and moving targets. So somebody who's never done it before, what would be your advice for that?
So one of the things that we run into, obviously, again, we're not your typical, you would never really call your TM and ask them what to price out 3-ton heat pump and air handler install it. That wouldn't be a typical phone call. But on the geo side of the world, you kind of get calls that are not typical. So, there's a couple different schools of thought. I think that one of the biggest things I see is contractors who decide that because it costs this much more, I need to make this much more. And so they will price it to the extreme and price themselves out of the job. And one of the things that at IGSPA last year, one of the things I found interesting is, as a contractor, is what are you making in the net per hour on your conventional jobs? And we're speaking a language that a lot of contractors don't speak, but that's something they should be able to do, is figure out how much I make an hour. When I do an install, I make, let's say at the end of the install, I make $2,000, and it took me, you know, 10 hours. So I made that, what, $200 an hour. If that's what you need to survive, then you would take that same per hour net and know that the geo is going to take you more hours. And so that's where the question really would come, is how long does it take to install one? Personally, if you have your driller out and they are bringing the piping to the unit for you, I think it's reasonable to say you're going to be at the job at least 2 days, which is probably a day longer than a lot of conventional systems. But then you just price it by what you want to net make on that hourly rate. So you need to figure out your profit. And if you think about it, if I was making, $2,000 on an 8-hour job, I can make $4,000 on a 16-hour job. But then the equipment, there's some other money that needs to be put in there. So there's a little better multiplier, but it's not as easy as to say, just multiply it times point, 6.3 and you've got your sale. It's not that easy, because everyone has different overhead. Everyone has different expenses. Let's say you're going to start getting into geo and you don't own a flush cart. In my opinion, that first job, you might have a squeeze between not making quite as much as you want, but then making sure they pay for the piece of equipment needed. I would say if you're going to do geo, you should own one, because the last thing you want to do is be dependent on someone else to help your customer if you get an air pocket or something. So there's lots of things like that I think you have to take into consideration. But obviously, I think that one of the neat things is in a lot of states, there's organizations out there, like Missouri has Missouri Geothermal, Iowa has Iowa Geothermal. Those organizations are there for contractors to theoretically be assets for each other to a certain degree. Obviously, not the contractor 2 miles down the road wouldn't be your first choice to be your asset, but guy on the other side of the state that's in the same organization as you could both learn a lot from each other. And a lot of times that's what goes on at these things. So I think that helping contractors is one of the best ways to get information on how to price jobs like that, or start pricing them, and then get a relationship with your customer or potential customer enough that see if you can see how someone else is pricing it and see where you're losing. What I've seen typically is, let's say it's a new install, 5-ton, you might come in $4,000 higher, and realistically, you would have still made good money, $4,000 less. Just the way you did the multiplying. One of the other things that I heard it today, we don't do this, or we lose out to contractor X every time. Like they don't even do much anymore because this guy over here wins them all. And one of the things I've learned about that is they're just doing a better job at the kitchen table, the way they list their rebates, the way they list the federal tax credit on their, so it looks like they're cheaper. They're not cheaper. I've seen that contractors' bills at the co-op when they turn in to get their money, and they're not cheaper. They just are better at the table. So how to present, but I know that most distributors that do geo will help with that in some fashion. So
That's all really good info. So backing on the pricing stuff, for us, we don't own a drill rig. We don't dig the loop in. We could dig the loop in. We do a lot of vertical versus horizontal drilling. So, we sub a driller or have the driller contract with the homeowner to do the drilling loop side of it. Do you see people marking that up, or is it just the price is the price for that? Or how are a lot of guys doing that work?
If you're having the driller drill it and dig it in, most contractors leave that as a separate contract. Historically, that is probably a better principle, because you don't control the driller to a certain degree, and you don't want to be liable for driller mistakes. breaking concrete, drilling into septic fields, you do not want the liability. So making no markup on that is not a big deal because you're also not getting any of the liability and they're not your guys. So it does create a uncontrollable variable that you want to be separated from you a little bit. If you can't make enough money selling the geo side of things, either your numbers are wrong or you need to adjust. You can always adjust your side higher. But again, if the idea is I want to make more money and do something that I think it's going to be a major part of our market going forward as a contractor. We Department of Energy put out an article stating that the only way to go electrify America is realistically geothermal. They couldn't say enough good things about geo, and there's an article written not too long ago that is stating that we're going to see quite an increase in the number of geo units going in the next 10 years. Speculation, I agree, but being on the distributor side, I've seen an increase in the last year. I don't know why that is. I know when inflation happens, people with money are smarter than the average people usually. And they know spending a little bit more money on something saves me monthly, and that'll do that the whole time. They understand how cash flow works. So yeah, I invested some money over here, but it's going to decrease my overall monthly output, which is helping combat inflation. So, there's a lot to be said about how to go about all that.
So for the guy that, back to the guys that are a company that's going to start in geo, sounds like they could probably find a driller to do the loop and probably do the tie-in. So you don't. I'm thinking out like if I'm a new guy and I'm going to get into the trade of installing geothermal units, what's going to be my big upfront costs. The drill rigs are expensive. The flush cart sounds like it's expensive. Generally speaking, as far as HVAC tools go, there's it's specialty as far as the water side. It's the way I'm looking at it is for a new guy, if you can get the loop handled by a subcontractor, which a lot of companies that drill for geo will connect your loop and flush your loop. A lot of them have flush carts. Distributors, which I don't know if K&E does or not, but distributors a lot of times will rent you a flush cart for a period of
A&E
time.
does rent flush cart.
Okay. So really my view, the big tools that you'll need that's different from conventional is some water side diagnostic tools, and you can talk about what those are and the cost. I mean, it feels like they're pretty minimal to me.
Yeah. So every tool that you would need that is specific to geo, I don't know about most distributors. I know K&E, we have a flush cart. We have a fusion tool, which if you're having your driller fuse it in, you shouldn't even need to mess with those things. So realistically, you have almost everything you need. I mean, you need a thermometer, and it needs to be able to insert into the Pete's port, which is a little access port on the water side of things. And most contractors would have a thermometer. They use it for the delta T between supply and return. They drill a little hole and put their filled piece jackknife in there, So most of those had that. So the only real specialized ones would be a pressure gauge with a needle, which realistically is pretty low tech piece of equipment. It really is a needle that's just checking the pressure in the water. And on some of the systems out there that have internal pumps, you would need a digital tire pressure gauge because there's pressure ports on the outside to check that pressure. And there's a tool called a gooser. I think that would be the only other tool that you would need. And what a gooser is something you hook up to a garden hose, flush all the air out of it, hook it up to the Pete's port to the unit, and pressurize your loop. If it was a little flat on a new install, after about a year, they relax and you have to come back in and do some water adding. Once you had if you have a pressurized loop, you should go and not have any other issues unless there's an issue. So tool wise, you're looking at, and honestly, I don't even know the price of these tools. So again, I'm not necessarily the best salesman, but I'll be there to help you. I'll get you the tools and get you pricing. But I'm guessing that the Gooser is probably $70 tool, and the pressure gauge is probably a $40 tool, and a $6 tire pressure gauge from Menards, or we have one that's probably $6 too. That's not specialized in any sense. So, and none of them really are. You can go and get a water pressure dial and hook a needle to it. We just have them. It's easier. So we're really not talking a lot of money other than, a rental for a flush cart if you needed it. But again, if you're using, most drillers that do it will flush the loop if they're fusing it in, which is why typically they're a little more money per ton. But that the other side of it is, especially if you're new, I mean, you look at a flush cart and you're like, yeah, there's a bunch of hoses and water, and what do I do? And I'm not saying you shouldn't learn that. I'm just saying you could get away with not knowing that, but you will have to be able to check the water. As you and I both know, the worst thing you can do to Geo is install it and not make sure it's running correctly right out of the gate, because everything you sold that customer is not going to come true. And you're going to create a customer who says Geo is not good. So you will have to have your gauge to check it to make sure it's giving you what you should be given. So, but those are cheap tools. I mean, we're talking under 200, under $100, I guess, if you're right about 100. So,
Yeah, you could. I always equate the needle kind of like a basketball, which you'd air up a basketball with. It's a little
yes,
thicker than that, a little different size. I don't think you could use that specific piece, but it's
it
similar
looks
to
like
that.
it. I agree with you.
It's real. There's nothing really like that device that goes into the pizza port. But other than that, it's all standard threading after that. So you can build the stuff with parts at Home Depot,
Absolutely.
if you had to. And I
If
would
you
say,
can.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would say $150 you could get into the specialized Geo tools. The only thing I would caveat that with is Climate Master's got the nice thing about Climate Master is they've got their iGate 2.0 stat that allows you to connect through an app, but setting up a Geo that's got some advanced controls in it, you do need a service tool to to install some of those. And I guess that would really be the only other specialized tool that you would need. I know Bosch water furnace has their own, but I think that does the water furnace tool also work for GeoStar
Yes.
products? And then does Bosch have their own service tool as well, or is it all?
I'm not sure Bosch actually has a communicating device other than their stat. Like, I don't think they actually have a tool that's secondary to the product. I've never seen one nor been around it. Now, saying that, if you had a carrier that's a Bosch with Infinity control, there's probably an Infinity connection you'd have to go through to do service on that version of it. And just so you and I both know, Climate Master in the near or late future has to be determined. Realistically, you should be able to do anything that your laptop with a service tool or that service tool, you should be able to do all of that from a phone and an app. Now, I'm not sure how I like that, but the reality is if it does work, it does give the ability to not have to purchase a secondary tool down the road. We're not there yet. Most of the brands have some sort of a tool at this point, which people try to get away with installing and not having them. And I guarantee you, that's always the time it's going to give you a problem. I'd rather have it, not need it, than need it, not have it.
Sure. And we're talking a few $100s for the service
Service
tools.
tool, whichever
Yeah.
brand. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that it's a good thing to have for sure because you can really dive into fault codes if you run into a fault code issue on especially the newer products. The older units that are, they have basic controls in them. Those things are simple as far as if you understand HVAC controls, Geo is not going to be anything complicated. When you do get into the communicating controls, you do need those service tools because it's gonna lock out on you, and you might get a code at the thermostat that says E11, low water flow, but you don't have a lot to go off of. And the manual operation is really nice too with the service tools. You can, you want to say, okay, low water flow, is my pump working? You can manually start your pump from the service tool and get a visual and put your pressure ports in and see, am I getting a differential across the coaxial?
And then just to what you're saying, back to not wanting to hook your gauges up, the service tool does have sensors on the system. So I'm not saying that they will give you everything you need, but when you check your water side and use the service tool to see what is my discharge temperature or what are my temperatures on my refrigerant cycle and my water, you can have an idea of everything on the refrigerant side is working. The water side usually is the biggest and quickest tool to get to the answer, but that service tool has a lot of benefits, like being able to turn it on stage 2 right away, get rid of the compressor delays. Nothing worse than standing at a unit waiting 5 minutes every time you have to turn it off and turn it back on to drive you absolutely insane. So it is nice you can do a speed up timer and cut that down to less than 40 seconds. So
Sure. Okay, so I'm a new guy. I've got my driller set up. He's going to tie in the loop and flush it for me. I've got a service tool, and I've got my pressure gauge for the water side and a temperature probe that'll go in the water side. Basically after that, it's kind of like an air source install, right? You've got a return, you got a supply, probably going to do some sort of sheet metal work to connect to the existing ductwork if it's existing, or build sheet metal out from there. It's pretty basic at that point, right? It's not a whole lot different than installing an air handler.
no, there's things that I would expect to see, but I'd expect to see them in conventional systems too. Canvas connectors, but in a geo world, there's a little more reason for them. So like on your supply on an upflow, if you don't put a canvas connector in and you have to do let's just say, heaven forbid, you have to do a evap coil change out, it's going to be really hard to do because you got to pull that top up to get that evap out. Canvas connector means you can lift it up, slide the thing out, and put another one in. But it's just good practice. It helps, the system is quiet, but putting a canvas connector on quiets it down even more. I would say the install is realistically, if you were to hire a driller, would be exactly, obviously best practice. It'd be exactly like putting in a conventional air handler with a side discharge left or right, which is not typical of an air handler. But I mean, that's the only difference is it's got a left return or right return. But if the driller's hooking your water up, you should be able to just do your normal metal and your normal wiring to a certain degree as far as powering everything. And the only skill that you have to then pick up is how to tune that unit in after she's running.
Yeah. So sheet metal, condensate line, electrical. There's no line set, no brazing needed, nothing like that. We're talking about a package unit. There's several. You can do split geos. You can do a split condenser in one location, air handler, or evaporator coil in a furnace in another. Hydronic stuff is a whole different topic to get on. But your basic, and I would say that's the majority of the installs, is a packaged geothermal unit. It's really just electrical, ductwork, condensate line, and then somebody's else is hooking up your loop. Fire it up, tune it in, make sure she's working well, and you're off to the races. Thermostat.
Which is conventional, the same.
Yep.
I'd say the most common thing you see is a unit like you described, or in a house that's got two systems, you'll see a split and a regular package. That's your typical. So you'll see a split condenser with an air handler up in the second floor with refrigerant going to it, with the condenser down on the first floor, because most people would want to keep the water in the lowest level, not putting water up above. So you want to keep all your package units or your condensing water parts down at the lower part of the house, and then just a regular refrigerant circuit to an air handler upstairs.
Okay. So that's all. I mean, it seems pretty simple. Somebody who wants to get into it, they should go for it. Get training, right? Go training first. Start doing some bids. Make sure you're with a good distributor who's going to provide you support. I recommend K&E if you're in the K&E marketplace. Get get after some training, learn about it, start pricing it. What I was going to ask is, what's the biggest failure? What's the thing that's like causes the biggest problem for geo installs, whether it be a new contractor or a contractor who's been doing it for 20 years? What's the thing that really hangs them up that's a problem?
I can tell you what I find is the biggest problem in geo as far as what I see in the markets I service. I don't know so much if the installing contractors hung up by it, but it is a caveat that if you're going to get into it, there's this needs to be done right. Is the loops need to be sized right. Now, most of your drillers are either pretty good about what they're going to do, or they're going to tell you, I want you to tell me what loops and how deep. Again, that's something that K&E and most brands deal with, helping with that stuff right there. That shouldn't be something that if you don't know it, that you have to go figure this out. Team up with somebody who knows what they're doing. But what you can't do is, if I make my loops too short or I don't put enough of them in, there's nothing that anybody, the homeowner or the contractor that follows up you, there's nothing they can. There is something, but there's realistically, it's a bad deal. There's really nothing that you can do to help that, because if it's been done wrong from start, granted, it might not show up till you have a 106-degree day. It might not show up till you finally hit that minus 10-degree day in a market. It's critical to put the right loop in. You can't go back. You can't, I mean, you can re-drill, you can add other things, but that is a problem that I see in all of these markets. Contractors that short loop or do some of the practices that I would say give Geo a bad name. If you're going to get in it, team up with somebody, get the right information, go to like if someone's to call me and say, hey, I'm in, this part of the state, I would say I'd call this driller because they know what they're doing. That's how you'd partner with them. So I think that is one of the biggest problems that I've seen, as far as, and I guess in some fashion, if you go to a driller and they say, I'm going to put 150-foot wells in, and you get a call as the contractor who takes care of their customers, and it's 110 degrees outside, and now I've got 115-degree loop water and it's tripping out on high limit. There's not a lot you're going to be able to do, and now you're kind of at a, man, I wished I had done this different. So that's where teaming up with the right people is probably critical. Obviously, we've never experienced any of that, have we, Mark? Where people have stuff that you just can't fix because it's unfixable. Well, there's always a fix.
Yeah, the fix is drilling another loop, unfortunately,
or an air to water source, yeah, something to help it, but it's still not. There's no cheap fix.
Right, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start doing this podcast, is kind of getting the Geo's kind of, you either love Geo or you hate Geo, especially as a customer. And I find that all of the customers who are very against Geo, when you start talking to them, it always turns out to be that the loop was short. There wasn't enough pipe in the ground. At the end of the day, there wasn't enough pipe in the ground. And their unit did not perform the way that it was designed to perform. And, it's just, they've got a bad taste in their mouth. And so, especially on the contractor side, that would be my biggest advice, is make sure your loop is right. You can pretty much fix everything else. Especially a package unit, it's going to work. I would say, okay, loop sizing and house sizing. So size your load correctly, yes. Or I say house, but size your load correctly, size your loop correctly. Everything else will be fine. It'll get worked out. There's enough money in the job that if you make a mistake, you're going to be able to fix it. You're not going to lose your butt. Just do the basics. There's plenty of people to help you out with doing the basics, and go from there.
Every one of the brands actually have software. But if you really wanted to get that deep into it, every brand has a software to design the loop. So, I mean, if you really wanted to get into it, you could say my soil type is X. I have 5 tons. What do I need? And it'll tell you, you need this many feet a loop, or you could even say I'm going to, 200 feet is my max depth, and it'll tell you you need this many of them. I mean, there's a tool for it, but there's also distributors that are more than happy to just say, hey, this is what you need. Or rule of thumb is usually 200 foot on a vertical well is minimum. So, yeah.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's really not that scary, right? It's not that scary for the contractor. It makes sense for the homeowner. Like it's a good solution for a lot of the problems we're going to face as far as we haven't even talked about utility rates. I mean, we could probably go another hour, which I guess we'll just have you on for a second visit. But the utility rates, as far as the homeowner aspect goes, they're raising every year. We're not going to have a reduction in utility rates, so it just continues to make more and more sense, which ties into the sales aspect of it. Getting the realization that our power is not getting any cheaper, so let's try to use less of it, save energy, and over the years, you get more and more a quicker payoff, more money in your pocket. So
Yeah. Yeah, especially with like on-demand pricing and all the other stuff that's coming into play. Um, it's not going to get cheaper. So I will say technology is trying its hardest to get ahead of that in the comfort world, heating and cooling. So hopefully when it gets to any worse, there'll be new ways to harness the temperature in the ground. I mean, storing cooled air, thermal storage is a thing that's coming in to beat on demands. I mean, so there's all sorts of technology out there that like you said, we could talk another hour, and obviously we know I like to talk, so we could definitely get back together another time. But there's plenty
sure.
more. I don't feel like we've did enough for the homeowner. Some of the things that we could go over for homeowners would be, what is it going to look like when they drill all these holes and tear up my yard? And it's going to look as bad as you think, but you got to remember 30% of putting in a geo is everything.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have to pay someone to do your whole front yard, your 30% number gets bigger back from the government. So, it sounds scary, but it actually, I getting into details. Obviously, you have to get your own tax person. You got to talk to them. But let's say I had to dig right through a flower bed, landscaping to get my wells into my basement. To fix that would be part of the expense of putting in geo, so that would be covered. Obviously, not abusing the system, but legitimately having those issues. But again, you have to get a tax person. But I think there's a lot we could go over for homeowners, the fear of geo too that they have. So
Okay, you've convinced me. We'll have to do a podcast focused straight on the homeowner. Do like a front to back, finding a contractor, what to look for in the contractor, what to look for in the equipment and the quotes, what it's going to look like when it's installed, realistic payouts. We could probably do an hour on that.
Yeah. What's it going to feel like when it's going on in my house, when the well driller breaks down in the side yard? These
Yeah,
are real things. It really happens, and it
sure.
could happen. That doesn't mean it's not worth it.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I say we wrap it up. Where can people get a hold of you? Where can people get a hold of K&E?
K&E obviously is K&E Distributing. Obviously, we have a website. You can go to that. We have an office in New Bloomfield, Missouri, or Dallas Center, Iowa. My number would be 573-540-0083. If you're outside of Missouri or Kansas, you're welcome to reach out to me, and I can get you connected to, if you're in our area, to one of our other salesmen or someone out there that would help you. Even outside of our area, we could probably find a way to get you in touch with somebody that would be, we have sources to get people that we would say were reputable. So we could help anybody out. So I'm more happy to help with that.
And you'd be okay with contractors reaching out to you who might be interested in being an installer, or drillers, anybody who may be interested in the aspect of doing the work, but also say a homeowner, if they run across this and they're not sure of who to use, they can reach out to you guys and you guys would help with that too, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Obviously, if inside of our markets, I would be a better resource to help with that. And let me just be frank, not every person that buys from me is necessarily the right one in every market. So I'm again not necessarily your best salesman in the world, but I am honest. And so outside of my market, I might not be able to help with who to use, but obviously the reason I'm on this podcast, the reason I'm part of the association in Missouri is I believe in geo. And if that means I can help you understand the benefits, reach out. I'm more than happy to talk to that, obviously within reason. So
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Thanks again for your time. And yeah, we'll definitely have to get another podcast scheduled. And for those who are listening, our plan is we're going to bring guys in from all aspects of the industry, maybe some homeowners who have had geo installed. I've had some contacts with them. They might be interested. We'll have manufacturers, installers, drillers. I mean, pretty much even some co-op. We're going to work on getting some co-op people through the utility companies involved and do some interviews with those people and really kind of uncover this geo myth for the contractor and for the homeowner. So thanks again, Eric. We'll talk to you here soon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.